Great civil unrest is coming. It's already here. But I have a feeling that few people realize it. But it will get cascadingly worse over time. I saw a poll the other day that said that 80% of American blacks support reparations for slavery. Now, this attitude is not specific to African Americans. It's prevalent all across the United States. But it is a toxic attitude. It is a terminal belief. You see, there are multiple demographic groups that have been plagued by poor ideas over a prolonged period of time. And they have been fed these poor ideas by intelligent people who are also evil, who seek to manipulate them and use them for their own benefit. These groups, in some places in the world through history, these groups, and they're not all racial groups, by the way, or even all religious groups, they are grouped by any means that humans can be grouped by, including ideologically. But these groups have been oppressed throughout all of time, throughout their entire existence, by intelligent but evil people who seek to exploit them for their own benefit. And unfortunately, what happens with evil is it always self-destructs. And in this case, what happens, it's as Jesus said, a house divided against itself cannot stand. Groups that contain subsets that oppose one another, that is not the way of true unity. And over time, a lot of these groups have formed alliances that seem permanent and deep, but they're very superficial. And they're a unity organized temporarily for a purpose. And that purpose is to unite against something that opposes what they want. And that's not the same as the true unity of love, which is self-sacrificing, not self-promoting. So their unity is self-promoting. And because of that, it will dissolve, and it will dissolve violently. And it's already dissolving. You can look at all of these temporary alliances and see how they're backfiring big time. A few summers ago, there were widespread riots in cities, and I told you then, long before then, and since then, I've told you, get out of the cities. If you live in cities, get out. Because the way out is closing and the cost to get out will continue to rise. I know at least a few people have listened, but I expect most did not. And I've said the same thing about the suburbs. It's better to live in suburbs than the city, but it's still not where you ought to be. And the things that are coming are obvious enough and sure enough that you need to get out. And very few listened to that. And with COVID, the price of doing so exploded. And if you had listened the years before that, when I was telling you this, you'd be in a really great position right now. But if you didn't listen, the cost has gone way up. Well, what we saw in terms of those riots is nothing compared to what's coming. And what you'll see is, in the broader perspective of civil unrest, you'll see these things that I told you were going to happen, like widespread shoplifting, stores closing and not being replaced, and these other vital, permanent shifts to the quality of what you think you're getting when you live in these places. It changes, and it changes permanently. And that's going to continue, and it's going to accelerate. Now, I also told you that there'd be a lot of violence, not just rioting. Things like more crimes being committed, more atrocious crimes being committed. And we're seeing that every day. We're seeing parents murdering their children. We're seeing children murdering their parents. And it will continue to get worse. Those of you who might accuse me of being an alarmist, let me ask you this. I told you that shootings would become so prevalent that it would just be a normal thing. Can you even name one of the last 5 locations of mass shootings in the United States? I bet you can't. And I bet you're old enough to realize that that is a very recent thing. It used to be that you could name those places, that they would stay in societal memory for some time. Now they're not even reported on because they're so common. But whatever one is reported on, there's a new one the next week, and you won't even remember the ones that happen. You see, we become numb to noticing these things, but that's not a successful coping strategy. You have to actually pay attention and project into the future what current events indicate are likely to happen, is likely to happen. So it's time to get out. I saw another article that tracked the traffic in downtown areas in something like 20 prominent cities. And the common theme was that there were about 50% fewer people trafficking these areas. And subsequently, these cities and states are looking for new taxes because they're losing the tax revenue of the businesses there, as well as the fuel tax from people commuting to downtown, because quite a few people are still working from home. But what I think was underreported in that article is the fact that a lot of people are moving out of cities. It's not just that they're living at home and working in the same company downtown and they're just not driving in. A lot of companies have moved back to in-person hours. So it's at least partially because a lot of these folks have moved and they're smart, and you should too. Because there's the question of the last person to turn out the lights, the bag holder. If you live in a place like San Francisco, you've got a lot of problems, but one of your problems is that as these prominent stores, or Portland or Chicago, as these prominent stores close up and don't come back, who are you going to convince to buy your house? In San Francisco, a lot of people are getting laid off who are in the tech industry. Who are you going to convince to buy your house? So when you wait until it's too late, the cost just gets higher. And as I told you before, it will get to the point where those who are still in these places have to leave with whatever's on their back. And maybe that's because some mob is burning down your neighborhood, or maybe it's because of something worse than that even. But the time will come. And so the time is now to do what you can to get out of these places, because there are a lot of disaffected groups, and those groups are getting sick and tired of the empty promises and the consequences of the ideas that they have lived by. And instead of feeding them better ideas, they've been fed even worse ideas, like this idea of reparations. And there are many other groups that have been fed many other bad ideas. And all of these are coming home to roost. And instead of staying loyal to the people that manipulated and exploited them, they're going to turn against them. And it's going to be ugly. So they're also going to turn it against everyone else. And when you come to realize just how many of these people there are, you can come to realize just how bad it's going to be. So this isn't an all-at-once thing. This is a successive blast kind of situation, or waves that hit over and over again. And just like the school shootings, it's going to get to the point where no one even pays attention anymore because it's such a common part of everyday life. So get out of these situations before they get worse, because they are going to get worse. And as expensive as it is now, it will be even worse later. Just like I said a few years ago, during COVID, just like I said before COVID, just like I said way before COVID. And this pattern is just going to keep applying. So do what you can, because it's going to get worse.